Well, here we are once again, lighting the candle, a world that works. I am Bill Carell, and I have with me three of my favorite people in the world: Ken Caputo, Jan Jeremias, and Lisa Sheehan. We have been talking for a while, and listening for a while, and creating for a very long time. And today we're going to do more of the same. Just to reacquaint you with what we're up to here. Um, let's just say out in the world, sometimes you run into situations that are not pleasurable. In fact, they might be downright stopping, they might be upsetting. All those things that happen during the course of a normal human life. Power comes from not spending too much time in that particular state. And being disempowered is not what the design of human beings was ever intended to be. Being empowered, laughing, loving, being happy, all those sorts of things. If you read all of the great philosophical books, um, unless there was some other motivation that's beyond what's it mean to be a human being, the whole story of ontology. Ontology is a fancy word from the Greek ontos and then G, like gee, I'm alive, and here's what it's all about. This the study of being alive. So today is a very warm day for me in Eastern Connecticut, and I'm going to relax for the rest of this week. I am going up to the lake, and I'm going to meet up with some very dear friends. In fact, anybody who's listening to this podcast, come visit. You're invited. You definitely should come by and just at least see what the lake's like. So, invitation, kind of an interesting concept. Um, what happens in the course of people inviting each other? What happens in the course of people reaching out to each other and creating a relationship? When I think about the number of times people invite me to different things to do, it used to be a bother for me. It used to be like, if I don't go, they're going to think something's not good here or whatever. And then what I found was, in order to change my relationship with invitation, is that I just started inviting everybody that I knew to everything I could think of. And you know what happened? Sometimes people came. And every once in a while, it was an extraordinary experience. So, with that in mind, I'd like to kind of take a moment and discuss at a fundamental level, at the level of being human, what's possible with invitation. For those of you at home that can't see, we're getting some rather interesting looks from a smirk to what's up with that, Bill? To yeah, but I mean, stop and think about it. What was the last thing that you were invited to?
Well, I think invitations can, I mean, they're the key to being part of a community, no matter how small it is, whether it's one friend or a whole gaggle of people. I mean, my invitations start as simple as inviting people for a bike ride or to join me on a walk, to being invited to a major fundraiser last weekend, that kind of thing. So, and each one provides a different kind of connection. But I think there's no end to what invitations can provide for people.
Well, let's take a minute and just kind of dive in. What is an invitation?
I think, to me, I look at the word and, doing what I do, where I invite people to participate in things, programs, or whatever. I think to invite has a different, it's a much more open, accepting way of asking or trying to relay information. It just seems like you're not telling somebody to do anything, you're inviting them. So I think it feels less threatening and more of a personal choice
Yeah,
about whether they go.
there is that okay to say no, right? Kind of
Right.
implicit in it.
It's up to them, and I think that, you know, for depending on what your background is and who you are, I mean, I think we're told to do a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
throughout our lives, and just the idea that you can make your own personal choices, like, and say, okay, I was invited to do this. Do I really want to participate? Do I not want to participate? What does it mean? Does it feel right?
And what's interesting about that is there are some times when an invite doesn't appear that there's more than one answer, right? I can remember when I used to work in corporate, there was a man who was in charge of everything that we used to refer to lovingly as God. Um, and he would say, how'd you like to come to my office for a little chat? Rarely did anybody ever turn him down for anything for some reason. But in the corporate environment, when we all were kind of at a level of, I don't care what you had for a title, when the man in the corner office called. And another example that might be when you're out on the highway and it's 11 o'clock at night and all of a sudden you hear a siren and you see lights flashing behind you. That might not be an invitation per se. He's really expecting that you will pull over and you will comply.
So one
But
of the
what's
definitions
yep.
is a situation or action that tempts someone to do something or makes a particular outcome likely.
I like that. So oftentimes there is this veiled and concealed quid pro quo on the other side of an invitation. And if I do that, what will it cost me?
It might not be a
There's
bad cost, you know.
Right.
yeah, there can definitely be context behind that, like what's the what's the relationship, what's the level of trust, like I know I found I've received invitations and I was very cautious about saying no or saying yes because I didn't really know, what the result of, you know, agreeing or saying no to it would be because I didn't have a lot of it was just not any reason bad, just not knowing, not knowing enough about the situation to feel truly comfortable, you know. So it can be kind of an interesting thing. I've always been very sensitive to that. Like I don't want to invite people to things until I feel like they're comfortable, you know, so that they feel they can trust that a no isn't going to have some kind of surprising repercussion or, unintended consequence. And if they say yes, they know what they're saying yes to clearly. Yeah. You see that a lot in business. It's like the timeshare thing. You want a free, you know? And then you go to the thing and you end up being in some kind of a crazy hard sell, situation for hours on end. And, you're invited, you qualified, whatever it is, but, it's not quite what you thought it was. They weren't clear.
When they close the door and bolt it behind you, you have an idea that this may be a little bit more than an invitation, right?
Usually just hoping this one's different, and it
Yeah.
never is.
Well, and the other thing too is like challenging the inviter, to give you a little kind of a sense of what it is you're going to. Like for instance, if I were going to ask you if you wanted to have what my daughter baked, that would be one invitation. But if I gave you a sense by saying, she puts these amazing muffins together and she uses two kinds of fruits. It's always got blueberries and it always has raspberries. And then what she puts in them causes everything to bubble over on the top. And then that turns into a caramelized, just beautiful thing. And the smell, and when you walk by it, it grabs you by the nose, and you can't not look. You have to have at least one. And so, if I make that invitation to you, would you like to have one of my daughters? You fill in the blank. That would make it a little easier for you to say yes or no, right? And now the thing's got to live up to myself. It's got to live up to what I've advertised it to be. How many of us get invited to apply for a line of credit that we have been selected to apply for? You have already been selected to apply for this. It's like, uh, what? I don't think so. It's not
You're
like
already
you've already been approved to receive the offer. You've been approved to apply for it. Gee, that kind of diminishes the whole idea of being special in an invitation, doesn't it? It's kind of like when your friend says to you, "You're the 13th person that I've called, and you're the last person I thought of. And, well, what are you doing tonight?" Not special. So, is there an art to inviting? Is there an art to knowing enough about something and knowing enough about the other person where you can make this connection in the invitation that actually withstands the scrutiny and that awkward silence that comes while they're trying to figure out if they do trust you?
Say that again.
So, is there an art? I mean, some people will tell you there's definitely a science. They charge big dollars for, having the right words, the right things in the right order, that you can say these to 100 people, and statistically 60 or more people will say yes to it, and less than 10 will say outright no, and the rest of them will say tell me more. So that this is that some everyone will say it's a science, but is it an art?
my thought is almost any science can be an art, if you put enough behind it. Um, and everything in life practically is an invitation. You put it that way. Every advertisement is an invitation to buy something.
Yes.
Then there's true invitations, and then there's people that just request something of you, which is also an invitation.
Right.
And there's, like you said, all the corporate things, like they invite you to a meeting. Well, there's not a choice there, but it's an invitation. So, and obviously everybody will tell you that there's an art to wording things that will get the most beneficial reaction or beneficial response, the most likely positive responses. So I'm sure there's an art that starts from a science that people practice every day to get the most. If you're going with the non-personal invitation kind of thing.
But there's also an art to not using the words. So there's an art to the visual. So like
Hmm.
a photo and a photo or a graphic, an invitation that creates a feeling or a mood that sometimes goes beyond words, which all of a sudden, you're like, oh, okay, that looks really good. Like basically, let's say something that involves food and they show you what they're going to serve. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, I can sit through this because I'm going to get this great meal or whatever. So there's also that whole visual component, which I think makes invitations sometimes very enticing or very, acceptable or just beyond, like you would accept the invitation.
I think
With
there's just a
regard,
fusion of art and science in anything that leads to a sense of mastery, the process of mastery. It's like, you know, a dancer has an understanding of physics and the mechanics of the body, but then the way they express that is artful. So you can be artful in the way you invite someone. Like, it's kind of funny. I think more about invitation as, like, for me, I use that word a lot when exploring new mindsets or paradigms with someone. So
Mhm.
inviting them to consider a different way to think or approach something. So instead of telling them, you should think about this way, or you should do that, it's an invitation to consider so that they don't feel like they're being pressured. They can take their time deciding if that's acceptable for them. So there's definitely an artistry to that I've noticed in people who are very, very good at it, and they're applying an understanding of how the mind works and how communication works in their ability of being artful. I guess both and.
Well, see, here's kind of the interesting part of it. What if asking people a question and getting a yes or a no to it is the fundamental science behind an invitation? Um, and what if the more involved it gets into a dialogue where there's an emotional exchange? And I really love what you had to say, Jan, because it reminded me while you were speaking of how I took a left turn in my advertising back in the 1990s, late 1990s, when my company started really getting into disaster preparedness planning. And I would go to a medium-sized business with 50 employees, and they would say, we're all set, and if we lose whatever, it's not going to cost us that much. And so you couldn't just say, would you like us to do a survey and find out what it's going to cost you should you have a disaster and the unthinkable happens. So I had this gal that worked for me, Nancy, and she came up with a picture of this guy in a business suit sitting on the ground with his knees crossed in front of him, holding a backup tape in the air. And behind him was the rubble from a building that had burned straight to the ground. No words, a backup tape. That's what you bet the future of your company on. And so the offer or the invitation was, think maybe we need to talk. Very subtle. And what ended up happening in that instance, rather than going through this long involved advertisement, which gave 8 or 9 good reasons to have a disaster preparedness plan, the phone rang, as opposed to people being willing to answer when we called. And one of the first phone calls we got was from a man down in Groton who owns a technology company down there. He said, Bill, you nailed it. That's what keeps me up at night. So an invitation isn't necessarily a one size fits all and that everybody's going to react to the same way. And I would say that the science part of it would have been, these are all the good reasons why we need to come in and, make sure that you've got, backups that are off site, that you have equipment that's off site, that your people are connected to other means of internet, et cetera, et cetera. And just let's start taking a look and see how vulnerable you really are. And it went from the science of making the invitation to have somebody hire us to the art, which is that visceral connection that in many ways is nonverbal. So some of the best invitations that I've ever received where somebody just looks at me and goes, yes, yes. So Are there many invitations going on in the world per day per person?
It's constant.
It is almost a personal assault, isn't it?
Well,
The
with technology
degree.
today is. I mean,
Say some more about that, Lisa, please.
well, anytime you open up your computer, anytime you open up your phone, and anytime there's an invitation to look at something, to participate or not participate, and with technology, invitations to participate in something have obviously changed over the years. So, like Jan was saying, pictures added, and now it's videos, and now it's TikTok videos, and now it's you have to keep upping your game to get the person's attention, especially in our human landscape. So every day is an invitation of some sort. Never mind if your phone rings, there's another one. If it doesn't ring, there's another one. You know, there's everything throughout the day. Walking down the street, going to the grocery store, shopping, doing anything is an invitation to participate in something. So, I mean, there's other words I'm sure that are synonyms for invitations that could take the place of our human interactions with things every day. But invitations are good enough one to use for right now. It's like, yeah, every moment is a decision. Every moment is an invitation to change something or to stay the same.
It's kind of an interesting thing that the crossing of where two people are in the art of negotiating something, someone is always buying and someone is always selling, and sometimes those roles reverse in midstream. But I think the interesting part of it is that I think human beings have this capability to turn it all off, and at some point no longer have any trust in any invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I might be right about that, and I'm not sure, but can you think of maybe an instance where, you might agree or an instance where you might not agree with that statement?
I think it's just about being skillful in both directions, you know? So if you learn how to navigate an invitation that's been extended towards you, like if you're clear and you have healthy boundaries and know how to ask good questions, you can determine the value, to you and to the invitor, you know. And I think there's also the being skillful about how you invite, you know. So, and just taking the time to do a little bit of discovery and share in a way that's permission based until it feels appropriate to extend an invitation with clarity, and also having established trust that no is truly okay and yes will result in something that where you meet the expectation that you've set for the yes. So it's just being skillful.
So that's really interesting, and I commend you for expressing how a trained person would behave in the world. And I always appreciate that because there is training available to get to that place where you do have the discernibility that you're talking about, or the grounding where you're not only able to hear something and think about it, but then also have a clear-eyed and clear-minded response to it. And most of the people who are inviting are counting on that you don't have those skills potentially. And that there, even though like the critical thinking and the curiosity that I hear, in what you are proposing, which I think is why people have to make a decision to get smarter about things experientially, and not just constantly decide that something is either good or bad. Because every time you turn on that, filter that basically says this is a bad idea, you now have locked yourself out of that probably for until you change your mind. And what would cause you to change your mind? Probably enough invitations where it started to not make sense that it was a bad idea anymore. I don't know. So, but the trust part, Ken, that I really appreciate that the trust window that things have to crawl through in order to get to your notice and your consciousness, is either a window that you've placed there and it's got a good job and it's serving you, and for many people it's not something they know that they've placed there. For many people it's just being shut down to any possibility that sounds like something else that didn't work out for them. And like, for instance, I don't know about you, but being a business owner, I get probably 15 emails a week that say, I'm confirming a Zoom meeting with you at 2 p.m. today so that I can talk to you about getting more business opportunities for your business by lining up client meetings. And I think, okay, so this is like really clever. This short circuits all the, I want to have a conversation with you where you hear a little bit about what I do. No, we're just going to go right straight for the hard sell. And how did that get to be like very popular? I mean, to the point where I'm getting 15 of those kinds of, and they're diverse senders. They're not the same people all the time. It's like, somebody on LinkedIn discovered that this is how you get past the gatekeeper. This is how you get past that trust filter. You just basically act like you've got the right to have that meeting today, and you ask them to confirm. Now, you know what the corollary to that one is? 2 days later, I'm just checking to see if you got my email the day before yesterday to find out whether or not you just missed out on it and you would like to schedule that for today or tomorrow. I mean, the chutzpah, I think is very, it's both very cool and it's also very intrusive,
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. That just feels like advertising to me. I mean, it's like, direct mail back in the day. You'd send out 10,000 postcards knowing that if you were lucky, you'd get 5% to hit on it. So you're just like, you're going for volume to,
Yes.
because it's cold. You don't have a system in place that allows you to create, dialogue. So you just blast out there and then see what comes back to you. So yeah, I get a lot of those too. We reviewed your website, and I don't take them personal. I know what they are. They're just, they're throwing a wide net and they're looking to see what they can rake in from it.
It's Publishers Clearinghouse. They get one little detail off of your LinkedIn, page, and now they pound away at. You may have already won. You've been pre-approved to have a meeting with us to find out if we can sell you something that you
Yeah.
don't need.
Yeah. Well, what it used to be, I think back in the day, it was, I don't know what it is now, but it required, maybe it's still the same, but it required like 7 to 9 contacts before you get a response. So you knew you had to layer whatever it is you were doing with multiple attempts, in the hopes that, you'd break through and you get the contact and then you'd begin the next leg of your process.
That numerical thing has come up a few different places. One of the ones that I recall was it takes 7 to 9 times for somebody to hear something before they actually internalize it, remember it, and can say it themselves. There's also another one that it takes at least 7 to 9 no's before you know somebody will really not buy the product that you're selling, which is why the goal in that instance is to get a no as many times as you possibly can. And that's supposed to be like a very strong tool in selling. It's just remarkable to me how that scientific approach, like you have to call this number of people, you have to be rejected by this number, you have to get this many appointments set, you have to do all that is scientific, right? Don't all of those training mechanisms tell you exactly what you have to do that is really mundane and nobody likes to do it and nobody likes to be on the receiving end of it? But if you do it enough and you get really good at being rejected, you'll be a millionaire.
Mhm.
I got the feeling, oh, there you are. Your eyes move, so I know you're there, Ken.
I'm here. Sorry.
You had almost a full
Slight
minute.
distraction come in. I had a notification come in that's threw me for a second.
An invitation, right?
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Well, I was thinking of Ken's whole, what Ken was saying about, going through the whole process of deciding and trust and all that kind of thing. And then asking, like, actually inviting yourself to something, like as yourself, like, inviting yourself to explore something or to try something new, and what it would be like for you coming from yourself. Like, I mean, I do it every day, when I invite myself, or basically ask myself to go, like, or invite myself onto my yoga mat, or to do my morning practice. I mean, it is an invitation that I'm offering myself. And I have I can say no and say, for whatever reason, I'm not going to choose to do that, but could we look at, I don't know, I guess changes we want to make on ourselves for that sort of whole idea of being more in touch with ourselves, getting a better handle on, listening to ourselves as an invitation.
And I think Jan,
Mm,
your literal invitation to us to join your 5-day challenge was a perfect example. Um, and it does make you invite yourself to other things that you might overlook at other times. So I have invited myself to exercise in the morning, even though I didn't want to this morning, or do something and answer the questions that you pose in the challenge and things like that. And I know, I know Ken said yes too, and I know other people have said yes. I think Bill said no or didn't do it. So it doesn't matter.
I absolutely, it did not register on my radar. I've been so flat out that I did notice the heart on the on the text bubble, but I'm looking at it and I thought to myself, holy moly. And then the phone rang or whatever, so all of those things have an existence system, so I can go back and be invited later.
No, you missed the boat, actually, Bill.
Uh, uh, I'll never get over it, will I? Ever, ever, ever in the history of the world. But
But it,
thank
that's
you.
building.
I mean, it was just a cool way to, and that I think that opens things up, like you said, because so you're someone we trust, so we accepted the invitation, and that sort of thing, and then we're using the discernment that Ken was talking about because we've done these things before. We know that these 5-day challenges can ultimately work for us, so we're going to give it a shot, that kind of thing. So
Yes.
everything comes into play.
It's kind of funny, the invitation thing. It's sort of along what Jan was saying, that in Qigong, a lot of times it's, you're inviting in healing or light or
Mhm.
love or whatever it is, and you're physically moving your body in a way where you're like drawing it in, you're folding it in. So it's kind of thinking about it. There's opening yourself up to, and then there's a more kind of intention place of inviting it in. So it's like the second step to that. Hadn't really thought about it that way, but that's kind of cool.
That is super cool. I mean, just, it's like when I do any work, like, when you do Reiki, you ask someone's permission. So, like, you're
Hmm.
inviting them
Mm.
into, can't, just send somebody energetic healing without inviting them or asking them, you know, without someone's permission,
So
Even when
so
I
that,
work with an animal, I'm basically asking, I'm like inviting them in, even though it's not a being that, let's say, might communicate to me in words, but it is a being that communicates with me on some level.
yeah, and what you're describing is a really powerful tool if it's viewed that way,
Hmm.
as opposed to a nuisance like a 5-year-old, asking when we're going to be there, when we're going to be there, when we're going to be, are we there yet? Are we there yet? But
My
that's what many of
cover must have been in your car.
well, I mean, I used to train the sales folks that worked with me, because they would call up and they'd get a piece of information that demonstrated that the person wasn't ready to buy yet, and then they'd go away. Sometimes that was within the first 25 seconds. You know what I mean? And then the other one, which I always thought was kind of interesting, was where they would recreate past conversations over the last 90 days. You had to do this, you had to do that, and then you were going to talk to this person, then you were going to talk to that person. And I said, what does that have to do with whether or not they're interested in having a meeting with you? Well, I mean, we have to honor what they told us. I said, yeah, but now you're telling them the story of why they shouldn't have a meeting with you. Why don't you just ask them if they want to have a meeting? That's all we did. Don't ask them if they want to buy. Don't ask them if they have any questions. Just say, how'd you like to get together? We've talked on the phone for several months. I'd like to see what you look like. That invitation coming from a completely different place, every single thing in the sales communication process is all about inviting them to have another sentence with you. Just one more sentence.
And that's
And
where the
then
science turns into the art.
yes.
That's where the science turns into the art. Yeah.
Yeah, when the science is not a club that you beat with people, you want to buy, you want to buy, you want to buy. It's like, no, man. And don't just ask about their kids so that you can bring that up one time in the conversation, and then ask them, do you want to buy? Do you want to buy? Do you want to buy? No, it's like, where's your head today? Are you okay? There's a lot going on in the world. How are you? Like almost nobody's ready for that when you call them on the phone. But that's the most powerful related conversation that you can have with somebody, where they trust you enough to say, it's been kind of hard. As a matter of fact, I'm recovering from COVID, or I just had, a relative pass away, or, I've got an animal that's 22 years old and been on borrowed time for 5 years and doesn't look like it's going to go well, where people just kind of like be genuine and real. Do we give people enough of an opening and an invitation, as Jan was saying, to give us permission to do the next thing, to make an invitation, to give them permission to give us permission? That relatedness and that, being to being kind of connection. And that at some point that can be totally nonverbal. And in some of the best instances in life, maybe it is nonverbal. It's using all the other forms of communication. So does that create a landscape of possibility with regard to both invitation and communication? It's an interesting thing. On the background of invitation, I want to create an even bigger background. So everyone knows what play is, right? Of course, everyone has a different relationship with the word play, or possibly a different relationship with what an experience of play is. But one of the most profound definitions of play that I've ever heard was give and take without intent. So if you look at a 2-year-old playing, there's no desired outcome. Sometimes it just looks like giggling, and making faces back and forth. No need to balance accounts. So how many human beings, or what percentage of human beings, have any relationship to giving and taking without intent and no need to balance accounts?
That's an interesting thing. There's a book by, I want to say, I think it was Adam Grant, called Give and Take. And he's kind of a behavioral scientist type person. And one of the things he talks about is, generally speaking, there are kind of three categories of behaviors that people lean towards. Some are givers, some are takers, some are matchers. And it's not like a good thing or a bad thing. It's
Right.
just, some people will, their first instinct is to send out, to give. Others is to they're more comfortable receiving, and then others are sort of transactional, you know. So, and his whole point is understanding who they are, so that you understand the nature of the relationship. So I mean, if you're working with someone transactional, if they extend an invitation to you, they're probably looking to receive something of equal value, you know? Whereas if they're a
Yeah.
giver, it would probably be a genuine invitation and they'd actually be uncomfortable with receiving value back. That's the challenge with givers. And a taker is going to want to be invited to things. you know or they'll invite you to things that are to their benefit, yeah, like that kind of thing. So, and it's just what's your orientation, you know by the nature of your orientation to those things. And everybody has all of them. It's just that your center of gravity sits more towards one of those three set points. So I found that very interesting. It's a good book.
Just hearing what you're saying, it also brings into play what you're very fond of saying in terms of meeting people where they are.
Hmm?
That it's like the Myers-Briggs thing, or the DISC analysis of who people, what their tendencies are, and how do they relate to people with different tendencies. Just having those three distinctions, giving, taking, and and matching, that gives you a different way to listen, you know, and a different way to listen to yourself listen. And in that, because you and I will never know what's on the other side of this screen, we're always going to know our reaction, like what you say, Ken, and how that makes me feel, and how related and close I feel to you over a number of conversations and years and all the rest of that. But I'm never going to know who you are or what it's like to be you. I'm only going to know what my response and this visceral thing that I have going. It's all about me. Unfortunately, my sensors don't project over there into your body. I can't see through
Right.
your eyes and hear through your ears. But the more you speak, the more you have a chance to impact on me. And when I think about give and take without intent and the whole notion of play, I mean, that just kind of describes our relationship for a very, very long period of time, both being silly and being highly intellectual, and really trying to use all of the body of knowledge that you and I have been fortunate enough to be exposed to. And it's the same for Lisa, and it's the same for Jan. And the repeated exposures to my invitation to come here and talk, and your invitation to come here and talk with you, and so on and so on and so on, and then our listeners. We can never forget our listeners.
Okay, did they say, like, is it just through conversation of how to decipher or discern who's a giver and who's a taker?
No, he goes a lot farther than that. And, and he's really just creating a framework for understanding, your tendencies and understanding the tendencies of others, and then, utilizing that information to improve whatever it is you're looking to improve. To me, what I found really interesting about it is the invitation is to not take things so personally, because now, instead of, if you're a giver and you meet a taker, you if you're thinking, well, they're not like me, why aren't they a giver? Or, well, they're taking too much, or whatever it is. Instead, it's just recognizing, oh, that's who they are, and then you can make some decisions as to how to, how or if you're going to have a relationship in that, you know, in that perspective. Yeah, he does some interesting stuff. He wrote a book called Originals, and a couple others that are really good.
But see, the whole point of having a metaphor like that, and it's not the truth. It's just one more way to experience an interaction and maybe come out on the other end of it with more understanding of how people relate to each other, right? And isn't that what all of these models are about?
Hmm.
Myers-Briggs, is that the truth? No, it's not. It's just a tool that if nothing else, should spark some really interesting conversation between people and give them the opportunity rather than saying, I'm a fixed object this way or that way. It's like, now, how do we kind of transcend that and become more related to each other?
Well, I like the whole idea of like no judgment, like Ken said, seeing people for where they're at and not necessarily expecting people, you know, you see what you see is what you get, and not expecting people to act differently or to change necessarily, just to be able to have a conversation where they're at that time.
Mm. Oh, and one thing I should mention this in his work, one of the things that he talks about with that book is it's a business book. It's kind of a success type book. There's always been this notion that the takers are the ones that win, and and a lot of the book is built around successful givers who have
Mm.
given more than they received or didn't try to be transactional and succeeded in the professional world. So so he's kind of like saying, don't give up on yourself if you're a giver. You just and sometimes they can succeed far beyond what someone who's more comfortable sending out those million spam emails would be. So it's just understanding the value in it and the strengths inherent, because what they found was a lot of givers would, kind of burn out, and wear themselves out in the process of giving, you know, without a healthy, kind of banks to the river for that. So that was kind of from, it was a while ago that I read it, but that was sort of the premise from what I remember.
That's an interesting thing, Ken. And it also highlights a very big difference in actually being a giver and being someone who believes that givers get more, but they're actually a taker in disguise. Okay, and I want to offer to you that giving, and having not read the book or anything, I'm taking nothing away from that. But you said some words, and I get to play with those. Okay, so being a giver who's truly a giver is the same thing as being a lover or a hugger. That at its core, at its best, at its purest form, if it's truly giving, it's inexhaustible, it's renewable, it's sustainable. And just what if those people who are techniquing stopped for a minute and really, if they're a taker, like, be the best taker they can possibly be, and see where that leads them, and let them make their own choice in terms of what seems to work. And again, like you said before, these are not necessarily either good or bad, but they're intended to allow someone who has these distinctions to at least start to have some power in that situation. Not like a way to be, but I'll bring to you, like, there are organizations, like, have we all heard Givers Gain? What's the mischief in that? Well, the in order to that's silent there, I give in order to gain. And then what happens when you don't gain? I mean, you can replace that with another sentence that comes from the same place, but is, I think, a little bit more authentic. The one that I've always liked, and it's as far as I stopped exploring, but it was, I can have anything that I want in the world, provided I'm willing to help enough other people get what they want first. So if I could really take that on like a powerful way of being that doesn't use me up, and wouldn't that be a smart thing to do from the get-go? Now, I haven't said that in years, but I used to say that at most of the networking meetings that I went to. And the main reason to tell people that is that I'm kind of happy where I am in life right now. God's been very good to me, and I want to see whether or not there's something for me to learn by being that conduit and the help to someone else. I didn't have that approach when I was 30 or 40. I had a modality, which is win or be beaten. Now that was exhausting.
That's an interesting thing too, because there's a developmental component to it, where I mean, up to a certain age, we're by nature kind of egocentric, and there's a whole thing about, the progression of egocentric to like, I think it's ethnocentric, where you start, like you recognize people in your tight circle family as, being able to pay value to. You're not just thinking about yourself anymore.
Right.
And it can then go all the way out to ecocentric to global centric, where some people reach the capacity where they're able to give to the whole world truly. Not everybody takes it to that wide of a perspective, but it's interesting you say that, because I think for when we're younger, there's a tendency to focus inward, just because that's where we are, developmentally. So it's really hard to think about, much beyond ourselves. So even if you're giving it, there's probably more of a self-serving component. So going back to the invitations by nature have some degree of self-service, that's relative to where you are in the developmental progression of your life. So recognizing that could be helpful too.
I'm going to take a breath for a second, Jan and Lisa. Clearly, I would have more to say there, but
Well, I think that age-related component, because, is interesting just because I think that as we age, we get a different appreciation for people, places, things. And so this whole idea of giving changes and we're less likely. I think as we mature or we gain wisdom, I always call it wisdom, um, we get a different appreciation and therefore the giving becomes more maybe, you know, outside of ourselves versus internally or thinking of only ourselves because we realize that life is fragile or that, like I think it changes. Or to me it should change, it makes sense that it would change.
It's funny as we're talking about it. This is probably why I felt recently called to give time to a specific age group, 25 to 35. And I'm wondering if it isn't because that's the time when you start to have this shift where you're starting to look outward and think about your unique contribution. And now you've got to navigate all of that, because if you're not sure who you are, if you're not clear on who you are, you get pulled. Like I know I wanted to give a lot and was kind of taken advantage of at various times, especially in my mid 20s through early 30s, you
yeah,
know. So and it's just I did you don't know what you don't know, but there's like a shift that happens then that moves you towards where you're talking about, Jan, on the other side of that. And no one really teaches us how to deal with that, It's like it's happening, but you don't really know, and you're just, kind of dealing with things as best you can experientially as they come up, you know?
And so much of life is cyclical too. You start out
Mm,
dependent on things because it's your survival in order to you need other people to feed you and clothe you and to make sure you get to the next step. And then there's that old saying about I tried to I wanted to change the world, so I looked to change the world, and then ultimately you circle back and realize that you have to change yourself first in order to gain that perspective of where you fit in, because if you are just like scrambling about wondering, like Ken said, like you're at that point in your 20s and 30s, and I know I hit it, and I'm not even sure what age it was. Like, there's got to be more to life than this. So then you start
mm,
seeing the different avenues that you could take because it's not just the paycheck or it's not maybe just your family unit that means anything to you anymore. It's got to go beyond that. So then you start cycling back within yourself and being a selfish person again and start belonging to the things that have meaning to you and not just because the crowd wants you to do things or that's what everybody else
yeah, yeah,
that your family said to do. Now you're being more introspective and making it matter more to you. And that way it matters, showers out into the world. You're inviting the world in, and even spirituality you invite in too. You let spirit come in, you invite it in. So all that
Right.
stuff makes you a better person, and you have to. To me, that's what you're on the planet for, is to be the best version of yourself, to show spirit. It's it through you, the best version of you.
Yeah.
How are you making that be, part of the grander scheme of things?
Well,
Fill
Ken, I
yourself
want
up with the best of yourself
Hmm.
until
yeah,
it
yeah,
spills over.
yeah. Well,
Yes,
see,
there
here's
you
the thing. I really applaud that you've made a decision to reach out to strangers, people you haven't met yet. You know, I think there are many of us that are in that space, and you've actually converted that into an invitation for us to introduce you to people who we think might be a possible fit for you so that you can have interviews. And I think that's wonderful. And like yourself, and probably like Jan, and also probably like Lisa, there have been many doors and gates to go through at different times of life, where there were times in my teens where things were effortless and everything seemed to work. And then my family fell apart in my early 20s. And so that wasn't effortless anymore. And I was pretty sure that I was not ever going to be up to the task. And so I didn't try. And then I got to be around some people who saw more in me than I saw in myself, and they became my active mentors through my 20s and into my early 30s. And now all of a sudden I could do things again, but it wasn't fun. It wasn't play. It was, I've got people that are counting on me. I'm 25 years old and I have 300 people reporting to me, or I'm 30 years old and I have 300 people reporting to me all around the world. And the reason that I did that was because I was good on one-on-one conversations with people. That's all I was good at, was having conversations with people one-on-one. Those people that I had conversations with just happened to run divisions of a large corporation. And they liked talking to me, so they put me in a position of responsibility. And again, it wasn't a game that I could win because I viewed it as a game that had to be won. And then I kind of got to this place afterwards when I decided to start my own company. I've always hung it on Neil Young's lyric, okay? Doesn't mean that much to me to mean that much to you. Now it's like exhaling. And now I can begin to learn, what goes on in both of our spaces, when we're not trying to get something from each other all the time, or trying to get something in order to impress a third party that's not present, or whatever. You know what I mean? So then you finally get to the age where we are now, and God bless us, because a lot of people don't get to this age. And then we can say, y'all, to the younger crowd, it doesn't have to be hard. As a matter of fact, you can make a really, really fun game. Play full out and don't keep score. And what does life look like when you do that? You go to bed tired, but typically you wake up happy and ready to go play again, as opposed to being spent and exhausted and never wanting to get out of bed. So the invitation is always there. And I love, Ken, how you put it, that training to be able to discern an invitation as the invitation actually is, and not the invitation that you either are looking for, or the one that you covet, or the one that you hate. It's just like, you want to be a volunteer? Okay. As opposed to, you want to be a volunteer? Well, tell me what you want. Tell me what you expect. I mean, how much time is that going to take? Does it need money? Do I have to drive anywhere? I mean, are people going to like me after I've been a volunteer? Is this going to be the end of my life? Those are almost not tongue in cheek.
Well, isn't that interesting how the more skillfully you believe you can navigate your own life, the more bravely you can accept or reject invitations, because maybe you're wrong, but you can navigate that. So, so that's okay too. So it's funny how it all comes back to, what you cultivate within yourself, and and that's going to create opportunities for you to explore, you know, based on your level of confidence and competence. Kind of
You know,
need
there's
both.
I like that
right.
element of discernment, because then you get to choose basically what invitations you will accept and which you will say no to. I mean, as we've been sitting here the last, I don't know, number of minutes, I'm thinking about, because we talked a lot about young, and since I spend quite a lot of time with older adults, and that whole stage of life, which we're invited there, it's a different invitation. I mean, being in a sandwich generation myself, for example, and you know where when you're young, you have you're, Lisa was talking about being safe, but when you're older and still cognitively aware and yet not able to, maintain that safety yourself. And so that's, thinking about people I speak to every day who are in
Mm,
kind of like, who want to remain independent, for example, but really can't be independent.
mm,
And and all those things, it's like, just as someplace that I've spent quite a bit of time with, and I'm, you know as I navigate and help people or talk to them because they feel like they can call, and I'm not their kids. So and they can talk to me about it, just yeah. So it's just an interesting place to be, from
Well,
my end. you know
well, I love what you said, and there's not an automatic rite of passage that as you get older, you get higher on at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There are many, many people who have everything they could ever want, yet they live in survival. They don't have an experience of ever having, the ability to just enjoy the moment, you know. And I want it to be real clear to our listeners that you have the choice to either seek some of those skills that Ken was talking about earlier and that we've talked about in depth, and by no means will you ever have it handled. It'll never be like you can put it on autopilot. Just the opposite is true. This is all about the mindfulness of being present in every moment and making a decision, if you do, to just plain freaking play full out and don't keep score. Try it for a while, you know? Try it. You'll like it. I don't know. Maybe you will. There's two or three of you out there right now that you won't like it ever. I mean, but the rest of you folks, there's hope for you.
Go play.
Yes. Give and take without intent and no need to balance accounts. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the boys on Car Talk used to say, we have just frittered away another hour of your time. I miss Click and Clack, the Tappet brothers.
Mm.
But I will tell you, what they did, in my opinion, for the most part, is a great demonstration of what play looks like. Don't buy a car from my brother.
Yeah, the most mundane of subjects to most people, anyhow.
Yeah. But it's also like verbal volleyball or badminton can have anything as a subject.
Verbal in an art form.
Yes. Beautiful. So, last thoughts, y'all.
I was just going to say that every aspect of life, every age you are, every day that you wake up is an invitation.
Mhm.
No,
mm.
and it's very individualized. Lucky for us.
And based on that, that invitation changes as we age.
The journey is the home.
Well, thank you all. God bless all of you. I love every last one of you. I'm looking forward to meeting all 7.5 billion. We'll just see how that goes. And in the meantime, keep lighting the candle. This world does work. And it's up to you and me to notice it and pass it on. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good week.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.